Welcome back to the Infrastructure Network, and a big thank you to our dedicated audience for tuning in. My name is Avery, and today we're honored to have Dr. Tom Iseley and Dr. Dennis Traux with us. Dr. Iseley is a professor at Purdue University and an expert in utility construction. Dr. Traux, a former president of ASCE, is a professor at Mississippi State University with a focus on civil engineering. They're here to discuss with our host Chad Smeltzer the vital role of risk-based asset management systems in infrastructure. We'll explore advancements in technology, the importance of smart investment decisions, and the role of organizations like ASCE in setting industry standards. Thank you for joining us. Please follow our page to stay tuned for more exciting conversations.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Infrastructure Network. My name is Chad Smeltzer. I am your host. Today, we're going to talk to some professors that have been in the industry a long time, Dr. Tom Iseley and Dr. Dennis Truax. Thanks for joining me, guys.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Chad.
Now, I was going to get into your truly introduction with Dennis. You were the past president for American Society of Civil Engineering, the 2022 past president. You've been a director and professor at Mississippi State University with civil engineering, environmental engineering, and you also do things globally. You were kind of mentioning before. Is there anything that I missed?
Nothing relevant. I have done consulting parallel with my academic position or during summers when I was off from the academic. But so I have both academic, agency, industry, as well as consulting experience. So jack of all trades.
Love it. That's good stuff. Dr. Tom Iseley, I have professor of practice at Purdue and the board of directors of BAMI Asset Management. Is that correct, Tom?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And then Tom, you got also a thing we're going to talk about later. We talked about previously with the Congress and things like that. We're going to touch on as well. But first, I want to talk about how you guys met. I understand you at some point in time got together at Mississippi State. You've been in the industry a long time. How did this all start? Dennis, you want to go first?
Well, back in the 80s, back in the dark ages when the dinosaurs still roamed the planet, the civil department at Mississippi State decided that it wanted to expand its opportunities. And it moved in a couple different directions, one of which was construction. And so they expanded and developed over a period of a few years a very robust construction, engineering, and technology program, which Tom was integral with. And he was really instrumental in taking this program from a few students that had a tacit interest to a very dynamic program, well over 100 students in the program. And this was going on parallel with what I was doing. I had come on to the faculty, was engaged in a number of things. The university was going through an expansion, and part of that construction program came out of that expansion. The other part of the program was that the civil engineering program was and had and continued to expand its environmental engineering piece. And that's where I came on board. As an environmental engineer, PhD, I came on as an assistant professor and was working in that regard. And then lastly, in the last part of the 1980s, Mississippi State still had a very strong focus on its faculty giving back in the sense of doing consulting and helping with community and economic development. So the faculty, myself included, gradually got involved. We were all licensed professionals, and as such, we got involved with various activities, which for me, as I suggested earlier, continued on throughout my 41-year career at the university.
Wow. Yeah, and then Tom, you were an entrepreneur with your dad and your family, then you were studying academic, and then you end up going to Mississippi State. Is that correct, Tom?
Yeah, that's correct. At that particular time, early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, I had moved out of being vice president of engineering for a company over in Alabama, and my father and I, my father's a water and sewer contractor along with my grandfather. So we had an opportunity for my father and I to join forces again and start a small utility construction company. And by the time we got to 1982, the economy had moved in a direction that it was very difficult to support all of us. So he returned to North Carolina, and Mississippi State at that time advertised for somebody with construction experience and a master's degree to come into their construction program and be part of the construction engineering technology program that was like it said in the civil engineering department. So I submitted a resume application and was selected. At that time, there were two of us that really focused on CET, and I was one of them. And so that was really my introduction into the world of academia. I was there for I was there from 1982 to 1986, and then in 1986, I had an opportunity to pursue a PhD at Purdue University. So, like I said, during that time, Mississippi State, we had a good group of students, and I
Yeah.
still have communications with some of them, and it was a really exciting time. We had a AGC chapter, and I was faculty advisor of it, and so it was a strong program. So,
Now, did you guys met like on campus, or how did that connection start?
Tom's office was on one side of the office suite, and mine was on the other.
Okay.
yeah,
We had to share a photocopy. Actually, in those times, it was a Mimeo machine, which nobody on the call except Tom and I don't even understand what those are, and a coffee pot.
Yeah.
And so between those 2 points of juxtaposition, we saw each other quite frequently. Plus, some of the things I was involved in, I would go over and try and get a real life perspective. I came out of a construction management on a large wastewater treatment facility in Northern Virginia, but I hadn't gotten a lot of what I call municipal infrastructure, the sewers, the pump stations, and that kind of thing. And Tom's wealth of experience in these areas, plus his collegiality, his congeniality, both, just made him a very inviting person for me to walk in and kind of lean against the doorpost, and we'd have a conversation and share war stories, and I'd learn from him, and we'd go on from there.
That's awesome. Tom, did you have any good war stories to share with Dennis?
Well, I don't know about war stories. We had, like I said, we had a lot going on at Mississippi State and done some consulting, but that's when I really had an opportunity to get involved in a couple of small research projects. And at that time, actually, during the time that I was there, I still maintained some utility construction activity that I had brought in with me. And it had actually grown. 1982 was a slow year, but after that, the economy got better. And the company, the little company I had, my wife and I were working together in it. It grew, and we actually bought some land, 7.5 acres out on 82, and had an office and a shop and so forth out there. But it was growing. It was getting very difficult to maintain the academic life and also the utility construction life. So I had to make a decision.
Yeah.
And I made a decision when I started looking at the future, it seemed like the academic world was a lot more challenging and exciting. So I made a decision to move out of the utility construction business and into the world of academia. So I don't know if that's a war story, but that's what happened. And I wrote one letter. I had 4 kids at that time, and so it was a major decision. So I wrote one letter to Purdue and was invited to come up and look around, and they offered me a position up there to teach and pursue the PhD. So that's what happened. My plan was originally to come back to Mississippi State, but at that time they had transitioned this construction program out, and there was not an opportunity to come back.
Yeah.
There were some decisions that were made at the state level to combine programs and not have what looked like duplicate programs. They really weren't, in my opinion, but the CET program was phased out. But it all worked out for the good. I went up to Purdue, and that's when I really started focusing on the trenches technology part of utility construction. I had done some road bores and auger boring type work, but when I went up there, I was able to expand my knowledge base and efforts in the trenches technology area. I think another area that Dennis and I crossed paths, he was very active in, of course, ASCE, and so was I. So I think that was one thing that was common. Even though I was AGC student chapter president, I still maintain a lot of activity in the construction. At that time, it was the construction division of ASCE. I was actually became chairman of the executive committee of the construction division. So
Yeah.
So we crossed paths there as well.
And for what it's worth, and it's not worth a whole lot, Chad, but I did want to mention part of the reason it went away was, as Tom suggested, the university's system wanted to optimize use. And what they decided to do was move technology to another university.
Oh.
And so the CET program moved to the University of Southern Mississippi and continued to go on there, not with any of our people and not with any of our students, but just in terms of administration. Fast forward 25 years, and I was successful as relatively new department head. And because of some friendships that I had developed in the construction industry in the region with AGC in part and some of the contractors in part, while they were putting together a construction technology or construction science program over in architecture, I was able to put back into place the construction engineering program at Mississippi State in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department. What was then the department is now a school. And we got the AGC chapter reestablished, and I even was faculty advisor for it for a few years. So what Tom was doing laid a really good background and developed some really good contacts that I was able to use some 25 years later to reestablish and build the construction component in the program at the undergraduate and graduate level. And it's been very successful. In fact, Tom and his team were on campus this past March, in part because the Civil and Environmental Engineering program at Mississippi State does now have construction, and it's expanding that program as well.
Right. Tom, did you want to add to that?
No, I just like to say I use every chance I can to get back to Mississippi State. I've got grandchildren, and the grandson was in the town West Point, which is real close to Starkville, where Mississippi State is. So I try to get back as soon as I can.
I thought Tom was going to say that I tried to hire him away from Louisiana Tech, and I failed. Totally true. I just didn't know if you were going to mention it or not.
Is that true, Tom? Why didn't you go?
Well, yeah, I don't know about failure, but I think what happened turned out for the best. I agreed to assist in bringing in a professional into Mississippi State that could focus on trenches technology, because one of their major supporters, actually the name of the civil engineering school, Richard Ruler, had also funded a position, or at least partially funded, maybe totally funded, for somebody to come in and focus on trenches technology. So Dennis we talked, and I said I'd be glad to help in the selection process. And that selection process was finalized recently, I don't know, several months ago, and they've got a really good professional coming in, named Dr. David Bennett. So
nice.
Yeah.
He was my recommendation, so I was glad to see that he was selected.
Well, and that's exactly correct. The position was set up administratively, and so I started pushing, and I heard Tom was looking to transition, so I reached out hoping I would drag him into town, because I know Tom has a strong affinity for Starkville and Mississippi State. I thought I had a real leverage, but unfortunately, I could not get all those ducks to line up and shoot him with one bullet in order to drag him in. So it was our loss, but I'm sure that the new individual that's come on board is going to be almost as good as Tom would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I made a commitment there too to help in any way that I can.
That's a win-win.
Yeah, it's a win-win.
We get Tom for free.
Yeah, David Bennett coming in is a real plus. He was with the Corps of Engineers and there in Vicksburg, and he and I had a major research project in the early '90s together. So we've worked together a lot over the years. So we'll continue to do so.
Good deal.
And get Dennis involved too.
Did you guys ever get to grab some beers just randomly? Just curious.
Well, the last time I was there, I think Dennis had other things taking place. So
that's a TBA.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
Chad, maybe we'll get you to Mississippi State.
Yeah, there we go.
Sounds like fun.
It is a dry campus, by the way.
Oh, it is.
We don't call it Stark Vegas for nothing.
Nice. All right. Interesting. That's a whole nother podcast conversation, I'm sure.
Yeah, but you got to be in Starkville to do it.
We could do that. We could set it up. So you both, so it sounds like, Tom, you've been helping out Dennis. Dennis, you've been kind of trying to work with Tom and try and get him back down to Mississippi, but things are going a little different directions. But either way, you both are still connected and talking, which is great. And that's important. Is just making sure you guys are still providing that education in different ways. Excuse me, and connecting. Still leveraging your relationship, so to speak, is what I was getting at with that. So that's excellent. Now, what in 1982 and versus like the 1990s, is there any big difference there that you guys can relate to? Obviously, 82, you guys, the economy wasn't that great, and then it got better. But is there any difference from like 80s to 90s in infrastructure that you can think of? It's kind of a loaded question.
Well, still a tremendous need for more funding into the infrastructure industry, whether you're talking above ground or below ground or whatever. And of course, we've had some bills that's been passed that's supposed to provide some help in that area. As far as the technology and the part of the infrastructure I deal in, there's a lot of difference. There's just a tremendous amount of innovation, expansion in the material science part of things that are done with pipe and underground infrastructure, and as far as the installation and rehabilitation and so forth. But I think the biggest thing that I have seen that's changed in the part of the industry that I work in, was primarily underground utilities or utilities in general, is the recognition that you can have the best technical solutions in the world, and you can know as much as you possibly can about the condition of the infrastructure, but if you don't have that under some type of comprehensive risk-based asset management system, then it's still probably not making the best decisions for using the right thing at the right place at the right time. So I guess from what I've seen, I'm seeing a lot of more effort being placed on utilities to develop, adopt, utilize best business practices. I see that continuing to expand. And one of the things that's happening there is that a lot of the states that are responsible for sending money into these utilities or providing funds or loans and grants and so forth, is they're realizing the importance of accountability. And so, for example, I think Indiana was the first state to actually come out and pass a law about a year and a half ago saying any water utility, there's about 2,000 in the state, that wants to get funding, whether a grant or loan, they have to have an approved asset management plan. And so in that law, it also authorizes the Indiana Finance Authority, which is the compliance part of this law, to actually establish a water asset management center. And I think I'll be the first, because there are water centers and water institutes, but this will be the first one that's established really to focus on, helping utilities with developing these asset management plans. So, I continue to see that the technology, particularly with trenches technology and pipeline condition assessment, continue to expand. But I think we're seeing also an improvement in the way that decisions are made with that.
Yeah, having
And
technology is huge.
I guess if I could have just a little bit more time. The other big
Sure.
thing that we've seen is developments within ASCE, and I think this at least started under Dennis's reign when we realized that just having a pipeline division has been great, but we really needed to expand into utility engineering. We have geotech and all structural and all these things, but really, there's been a lot of growth in the last few years in the civil engineering discipline, recognizing the importance of utility engineering, and so we now have as of 2015, we have a utility engineering and surveying institute. So I believe I think that's the newest institute in ASCE. So what that means is we see a lot more, from ASCE in the civil engineering industry, a lot more focus on the importance of utilities.
Yeah.
Whether that's for a project that's being built and knowing where the utilities are, and that's kind of what we taught at the 5-day school at Mississippi State, the location and mapping of underground utilities. So
Yeah.
yeah, we see that. So there's been a lot of change. I think ASCE's been a driver behind it in a number of ways. So,
Yeah.
so and I don't think it's still exciting. I really get excited seeing the students recognize the opportunities and potential that for innovation and entrepreneurship and things like that in the industry.
Yeah. A lot
So
of that.
it's an exciting area.
Yeah. Dennis?
And we got to have, and really to meet the challenges of the future, whether you're talking about above ground or below ground infrastructure, we got to have the best minds, the best academic programs training those minds. So
That's for sure. Go ahead, Dennis.
Let me take you back to 1980. The biggest change I saw was in the early 80s when the federal government stopped investing in infrastructure. I mean, I saw it when they cut out the grants programs for wastewater and water, and then a few years later they realized just how difficult it was, and they put up the SRF programs, and they've morphed over the decades. But really, you go back really to 83 through 86. The administration at that time basically said we've built everything we need, and really coming into the 80s, we built infrastructure without any real consideration of how long it was going to last. We had these cookbook numbers, and we talk about a wastewater treatment plant lasting 25 years, and yet you'd walk out and see one that had operated for 75 years. Maybe not as well as it should, but nevertheless. And so the idea was that coming in through the 80s, when the money kind of went away, all of a sudden it became obvious that it wasn't just a matter of building stuff. It was also a matter of thinking about how it was going to be maintained. And the big change I saw between the 80s and 90s was the start of the conversation about preventive maintenance. We have to get ahead of this thing. We need to make sure that it continues to operate. It's got a life cycle. And we talked about life cycle cost analysis back in the 80s, and most of the people poo-pooed it because you could manipulate the numbers to make anything. I mean, I sat in one environment where I had a person that was selling galvanized steel. Another person was selling cast iron. Another person was selling concrete, and they all made the pipes look exactly the most cost efficient just by the way you tweak the numbers. And we're a whole lot better now. And I guess the disadvantage I saw was that by we got into this century, preventive maintenance really became a non-conversation. Economics being what it was, we continued to fail to invest in infrastructure, but we were no longer talking about preventive maintenance or even progressive maintenance, let alone asset management, which is all the same environment. And I think that's really changed. And so going back to where ASCE has stepped up, getting the bipartisan infrastructure law passed, and again, just in case you're not aware, and even if you are, I'm going to say it anyway. As I often say, better redundant than omit. ASCE made 43 recommendations about infrastructure that were adopted as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. Every area that we put in our national infrastructure report card was covered, plus internet, which ultimately got picked up under IRA, which we were also integral in getting. So the funding that the federal government had ignored for the better part of 40 years was actually beginning to flow again, in large part because of the work that ASCE did, aligned with the president and Congress and state representatives to get this moving forward.
Yeah.
And of course, it's got to be lifecycle. It's got to be forward looking. It's 21st century infrastructure. It's not 20th century infrastructure.
Yeah.
So we also had to change new materials, new processes, which is why the stuff such as, let's say, underground pipelines, the community I live in, or that I in effect am aligned with here, Starkville, is going through a sewer replacement program. Downtown is torn totally to pieces because instead of doing some kind of trenchless technology approach, they've gone back and used the old technology and torn everything up. And that's what we're having to live with. And that's okay, but it's not the best way necessarily to do it.
Right.
I was talking with the Secretary of Transportation in Puerto Rico, who's a former student of mine, graduate of Mississippi State. And she was saying that when you talk about wastewater infrastructure failure, you're really talking about transportation system failure. Because at the end of the day, when you end up going back in and fixing that pipe, whatever it may be, you also have to fix the road above it, shared easements, shared systems. So we have to think about systems design and systems management in a way that optimizes the investment that we make. And I think that's what ASCE and Tom and others are really advocating for, and has caught fire. And then I'll go to UESI, Utility Engineering Surveying Institute, which Tom is absolutely correct, a relatively new institute. This group is very dynamic, very engaged. They've been putting together standards and advocating for standards and manuals of practice in the utility area. Been quite successful. In fact, I was at the National Council of Examiners for Engineers and Surveyors, NCWS annual meeting last month. And one of the things that came up was, here's all these ASCE standards that are being forced upon us. How are we going to manage it? How are we going to know who's capable of managing it? And the short answer to that is ASCE and UESI are working hand in hand to put together certification programs so that individuals can come in and say, look, it's not just that I have a PE, it's that I have a PE and expertise. It's demonstrated through a combination of education and examination, or evaluation is actually a better way of putting it. Education, evaluation, and experience, all of which come together beyond just having the PE. And here's a certification that documents that, validates that. And that certification requires me to stay current. It's not something I got 5 years ago and I'm still trading on. It's something I got 5 years ago or 5 minutes ago, and I'm continuing to update and constantly learning new processes. So we're trying to respond to, at ASCE, we're trying to recognize within the profession that tomorrow is here. What we're building today is the infrastructure we're going to have to live with and build our economy on for the next 80 years. So in some ways, we're really talking about 22nd century infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that's why we start thinking about new ways. And that's, I think, Chad, and I'll to your horn a little bit, I think that's why you're doing what you're doing with this, with the podcast and the other activities you're involved in. It's an idea of trying to get people to start thinking about looking forward. What do we need to be doing for tomorrow now, rather than what did we do yesterday that worked okay?
Yeah. No.
And I applaud you for it. It's important to do.
No, thank you. It's that's it right there, is hearing the war stories, or hearing the problems of Orangeburg pipe, corrugated metal, all these products that were put out back in the 80s and 90s, 70s, they were just low price infrastructure, utilities, just put them in the ground, get it started. We need to build, right? We need to grow the economy. So now we're dealing with a lot of all that repairs and replacement, and how we're going to do that. So
we've talked about it a lot, I think, above ground in the context of politicians love cutting ribbons on new bridges and roads. I don't know too many politicians that are real thrilled about cutting ribbons on new sewer line, but that's largely because it's buried out of sight, out of mind.
And
It's the same concept.
yeah,
That the infrastructure is a defined life. We have to maintain it. And the other piece is, and Tom lives this, and I'm sure can share perspectives on it. It's better to invest a little bit now in asset management or progressive maintenance than it is to wait until the system fails and have to deal with a failed system down the road. I mean, you're literally talking orders of magnitude increases in the investments that have to be made to replace a failed system than to maintain a system operationally optimized during the same period of time and beyond.
Tom?
Yeah, I had an opportunity to learn and actually help develop the asset management program with the city of Atlanta, and that was began in 2000. I started working with as a senior advisor to the commissioner there in 2003. And what Dennis is talking about as far as being a changing the paradigm to start looking at the future and how to prepare for it. And so the mayor at that time, she was unique, Mayor Franklin. She was very inspirational. She took pride in calling herself the sewer mayor because they had to deal with that consent decree, but she was passionate about water, and I think she really took pride in in trying to do the best job she could. That mayor, they're involved in a lot of things, but she made it water her focal. She wanted to try to move in from being, some people say, worst in class to being first in class. And when I talked with the commissioner, his advisor, we realized that we couldn't do that without having some type of a asset management program, because that took into consideration the life cycle costing and being able to look for the best technical solutions and being able to focus on condition assessment so that you can know what needs to be done and be able to be proactive instead of reactive. So all of those parts have come into play, and I think ASCE has been a major, a major catalyst on all of that.
Tom, when Atlanta, I worked with a number of engineers, J.C. Goldman and that group that you also were working with over in Atlanta to get the asset management plan in place. The question that I never got an answer to for a couple of different reasons was, were design decisions being driven by the asset management piece? Were how things were being done were being driven by the asset management analysis, or was this really a matter of build it, now let's figure out how to manage it, which is really what preventive maintenance was. We built stuff and then we kind of figured out where the problems were and tried to prevent them in the future, but it was never part of the OPM was never part of the design piece. Asset management, I think, should be, and I'm just wondering, was it for Atlanta?
Yeah, the dynamics there was interesting and challenging, but I was working directly for the commissioner, and I was working with the champion of asset management, EPA, Steve Albee, and we were trying to, change the way things are. But to answer your question specifically, a lot had already been put in place with the program management team there, and the design decisions to kind of to focus on the consent decree. So at that time, we were doing more with operation maintenance. I was doing more with the employees of Purdue out at the O&M facility than I was able to do with the engineering community. Although they did come to our meetings, but in 2003 time frame, 2004, the term asset management didn't mean a whole lot to a lot of people. So, but now it does. So things have changed. But at that time, we were not able to really have an impact on the design decisions that were being made. But
that's the reason I ask. I kind of got the idea that there was a real effort to try and make it impactful, but that for a variety of reasons, part of it was just not believing in it. Again, I go back to my 1980s version where LCA, lifecycle cost analysis, was something that people manipulated to try and sell something rather than make it valid. And of course, what Tom was working on was making it valid, making it something that you can analyze with a high confidence. And we are there today. You can do LCA now, or LCCA if you prefer, now with a good reliability and a good confidence. And what I always advocate for, and what I've said over the past few years is, typically if you look at the asset management in the design, if you really look at the best design, it's not the cheapest design. And so as such, the investment that's made on the front end for those that are doing the consulting or those within municipalities, you realize you make that investment, but it pays dividends later because you're not having to go back and make repairs, or you don't have the operational problems that you're having to deal with on a, I'm going to say, routine and frequent basis.
Yeah,
And so now I invest my money instead of maintenance, and I start investing it in the needed new infrastructure, expanding, upgrading, improving, updating, as we really should be doing all along anyway. So anyway, it's an important piece.
You were going to say something, Tom?
Yeah, no, I was just saying that's the beauty of life cycle costing is really being able to make the best decision in the long run. I'm actually teaching a class right now. I just finished it up this morning for one class on asset management of underground infrastructure, and we looked at an example just like that, where the utility had to make a decision on dealing with the root cause or a quick fix. And, unfortunately, they went with a quick fix. But that happens so often when people don't really understand the impact. But I did want to say that, with these guidelines that we have now on asset management plan, for example, the ones that Indiana has adopted, it requires the utilities to look 20 years into the future. In other words, you got to establish the inventory and the condition now, but it also requires to look into the future and establish 3 scenarios. What's going to happen with that infrastructure over time if they do nothing?
Yeah.
And then what happens if they just raise the rates enough to keep the utilities in the current condition? But typically the current condition is unacceptable because they've got too much I&I, too much water loss. So that's really not a viable solution. But the next scenario is, what does the rate need to be over the 20-year period for, to invest properly, adequately into your infrastructure to keep it where it needs to be.
Yeah.
And so what that does, I've seen this actually work out with a town council out on a plan up in up in North Carolina, where once they were able to establish, if you don't raise the rates, what the consequences are.
Mm.
And that helps the politicians be accountable, because if a politician is running and they know that their counterpart, can actually point and say, if he's running on don't raise the rates, and this is what he's advocating. So we're seeing some change there. That's part of the asset management, and that again ties back into the costing models and looking at the life cycle cost, because you're looking what's going to happen over 20 years.
Financial asset planning is going to be huge as we get more of the asset data into the systems to be more accurate and more dependable. I think we're still growing into this asset management systems and trying to ascertain what we have and what we can bring into a database to understand it and then do those calculations, I would assume. Dennis, you were going to say something.
Well, you're saying along that same line, as we look more and more, and I imagine we will continue to, for the at least foreseeable future, look for public-private partnerships on infrastructure. The private side of this is going to want a certain level of assurance. They're going to want to manage their risk. Not saying the public side shouldn't be wanting to do it, but the pressures of fix it now, worry about it later, it's failed, we've got to have something, or simply the fact that, again, I want to cut a ribbon, so let's get it in the ground, or I got a vote coming up, so my constituency wants to see something done, let's do it and cover it up.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. And on a P3, what you're going to be looking at, I think I really believe we're there, that we can provide that kind of information, particularly if a P3 becomes kind of what you see in Europe a lot, what I saw in the developing areas of North Africa a lot, having worked in Turkey for 5 years, is this build, operate, transfer (BOT) concept. And so you end up with a private entity building and operating a system, getting the payback from the user fees and other revenue streams from operating the facility, and then transferring it over. The University of Mississippi State is using that concept in building dormitories. Instead of having to go get capital or bonds to build a dormitory, you get somebody to come in that invests in it. They get their money back out over a period of time. The university gets the use of the dorm, and the dorm when it's transferred. But having to be able to manage that asset in a cost accountable way, a financially responsible way, I think is going to be increasingly important, if not already very important right now.
Yeah. Anything else, you guys? We're almost out of time. We are out of time, actually, but we could keep talking. But
Every time we do
I
this,
know it went flying by.
yeah.
Yeah, sure has. I don't have anything to really add to it except we do have the Congress that's coming up in end of September, 28th through 30th. And the whole idea behind it's called the Global Buried Asset Management Congress, and the whole idea there is really to get the international industry to stop, take a look at where we are, and where do we need to go? What path do we need to be on? And by say 2030,
Yeah.
and how do we get there? So, when EPA really got involved with asset management, Steve Albee, which was the champion, kind of traveled the world and looked at what's going on in other countries, and came back with workshops and so forth, and started opening up our thinking process. And so, my idea is about 30 years later or 20 years later is to stop and take a look at, are we on the right path? So
It's good.
we're excited about that. We've got the international speakers coming into Chicago, and
Love it.
so
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tom, for putting that all together. That's instrumental in like educating and making sure we're on the right path for underground trenchless rehabilitation, getting the right applications, the materials in place, and make sure we're applying these products correctly so that they're gonna last for 50 years, I hope, at least. So that would be the goal. Dennis?
Yeah, Chad, and again, to segue from that, let me amplify what Tom just said. Uh, we tend to be a bit complacent in the United States because we tell ourselves we're the greatest country in the world. I'm not running down you, don't get me wrong, but we have a lot to learn.
A lot of work.
I mean, just in terms of, uh, well, in terms of infrastructure, we rank 13th in the world, in just the developed world. Okay, so we got a long way to go. There are lessons that have been not just learned but proven in other areas, and bringing people in from overseas, as Tom's doing, is a very viable way to share that. ASCE, UESI, and our other conferences, our other institute congresses do this. They bring people in from around the world, and it's a really great time to learn what other lessons learned are, not just U.S. lessons, but international lessons. And then the last thing I want to just throw out, of course, is the plug for the ASCE annual convention that's coming up on the middle part of October. I think we start around the 18th, according to my calendar off here to the left. And at that event, we're going to be launching or having the premiere of our Future World Vision outcome, our movie, Future Cities. And you're going to be seeing this move around the U.S. over the next several years. Primarily, it's designed for a 3D IMAX. If you have an opportunity to go look, it's talking about the future, not just because we call it Future Cities, because it's a city platform, but the systems we talk about at the city level are also going to be there in rural. In fact, just briefly, remember, if you're not aware, ASCE defined 5 different cityscapes in addition to a mega city where 25 plus million people live. And we're already there. I mean, we've got 3 cities in the world right now that are right at the door of 25 million, not 30 years from now, not 20 years from now. You also have rural cities and off-world cities and frozen cities and offshore cities, or floating cities, as Future World Vision calls it. And these are all being talked about in various capacities. There are 3 offshore cities being built or planned right now. The rural city concept is something that is an opportunity to provide services and infrastructure to rural areas in a cost-effective way. And the others all have place. So we talk about future cities. These are the future cities that we see, and recognizing that we're depleting our water supply. I just read a report this week yesterday about how we're depleting our aquifers. We already know that surface water supplies are in limited quantity. Climate change is having an impact. That's all impacting how we do and what we do. But not just the water piece. It's all aspects of our life. It's our economy. It's our quality of life. It's national security, and it's all wrapped up into what we do in terms of infrastructure for the next decade, next century.
Yeah. Tom,
No, that's
good. All right. Well, gentlemen.
That's a good way to end.
He did it. He wrapped it up for the future. I was going to say virtual reality, digital twin, but we never got into that stuff. But Tom.
Oh, that's Future World Vision. I'm sorry, that was implicit.
Dennis kind of talked about it at the end. So perfect. Thank you both for joining me. This is great. You guys are doing tremendous things, both as, professors, doctors in your profession, and just helping educate the younger generation in the United States. So thank you so much for what you guys do, and thank you for being a guest.
Thanks, Chad, for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks.
You guys have a great.
Don't forget, we got to crack a tap here soon.
That's right. Someday I'll get down to Mississippi sooner or later.
All right. Sounds good.
All right.
Meet in Purdue.
Bye, guys.
Take care.